All right, so we have three wonderful panelists with us today. We have Jacob Wilson from the Campus Election Engagement Project, and we have Bob Stockwell and Jim. I'm going to have you pronounce your own last name for us so I don't butcher it, from De Anza College. They're both from De Anza College.
It's Jim Nguyen. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to practice that. So why don't we just go in that order, Jacob, Bob, and Jim. And if you could all do your own introduction, introduce yourselves and tell us what room you're in, but then just start out with a short overview of the work that you're doing around voter education. And we'll get into more depth in a little bit. So Jacob, why don't you go ahead and launch us?
For sure. Thanks so much, Gail, and to Campus Compact for hosting this virtual resource exchange. My name is Jacob Wilson. I work with the Campus Election Engagement Project as our Virginia director, and I also work with campuses in Missouri. And in that role, I guess to start out with the room, I am in my office/spare bedroom that is a bit of a disaster area, so I'm very grateful for these virtual backgrounds. Yes. And in terms of some of the work that I do and my colleagues at CEEP do, we work with campuses across the country to help them institutionalize voter engagement practices on campus. One of our signature programs is our fellowship program that I'll talk about a little bit later. But in my work with campuses in Missouri in 2018 and Virginia in 2019, I have been fortunate to work with dozens of undergraduate students who are serving as fellows, and those we train and educate those students to be peer educators. And I'll wait a little bit to go into more detail about that for some of the questions that we have. But additionally, in terms of voter education, a project that I'm working on and very passionate about is how we work with faculty members to make them feel more comfortable engaging in political dialogue with their students, and what resources are needed and desired by faculty members from a wide range of disciplines to be able to engage their students in critical thinking and understanding the issues and candidates in elections, whether they're at the local, state, or national level.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. We'll move on to Bob.
Okay, thank you all. Appreciate you hosting this this Campus Compact, this exchange here today. Can you hear me? Just a voice check. Okay. So my name is Bob Stockwell. I'm just to start off, I'm sitting in my dining room space close to my router so that I have decent bandwidth because the infrastructure here is awful. I'm here really to represent some of the work that I'm doing around voter education, voter registration, voter mobilization. I have a bunch of different hats that I wear in my job. I teach political science. I'm the chair of the department. And I also run a program with Jim Nguyen here, who's with us today, a public policy school program that does work that has currently paid interns that do work around advocacy. And that group has been doing work around voter registration this year. And I can say much more about that program. I also work closely with our union. And so I'm the executive secretary for our union. I co-direct, I'm the co-chair of our PAC, our Political Action Committee. And we direct there a group of about 15 interns that do voter registration and voter mobilization work. We have done so since 2012. So I can talk about those experiences. I also have some experience having been the acting director of our Civic Engagement Institute at De Anza College in Cupertino. We call it VIDA, the Vasconcelos Institute for Democracy in Action, which is directed by Cynthia Kaufman. I was the acting director for 3 years, 3 springs when she was on sabbatical. In that capacity, I helped organize a campus vote project. It was called the Campus Vote Project in 2016. 2 years before that, VITA also organized a My Vote Our Future campaign, which was an organized effort with the county, Santa Clara County, register our voters. We have since, through that organization, and Jim and I both are involved with this work because it's expressed through our department of the work we do in our classes. We have a grant from an organization, a community organization called the Asian Law Alliance, and they have granted us $10,000 to $15,000 over the last several years to do voter outreach, voter registration, voter education. And then ultimately for us, it's voter mobilization, which kind of the whole piece, the whole kit and caboodle, if you will. So that's what I'm here to share out some of that work, that side of the kind of the institutional stuff. And Jim, I think I'll let him share out what his offering is here today. So look forward to the conversation. I'm afraid I have to leave at 1:30 because I've got a 1:30. I just wanted to put that out there. I don't want to be rude, but just wanted to register that.
Thank you. So maybe if Jacob's okay with it, on our next question, we'll let you go first. Okay, thanks. Okay, Jim?
Yes. Thank you, Gail. Good to see everybody. And I'm glad you put this on. And I want to thank you for inviting myself and Bob here from De Anza College in California to be here with you all. Bob went over a lot of the type of work he's done as well as we do. Gave you a quick snapshot or highlights about the work at De Anza College. I'm also in the political science department with Bob. There's 3 full-time instructors there at De Anza. And maybe a couple of things that I can kind of add in with what Bob has already shared is 2 things. One is I was Vice President of Academic Senate, and on our Academic Senate website, we have a description of political advocacy work and political engagement work and what faculty can and cannot do. And so I can share that with you all if that's something that you're looking to put out that might help encourage more faculty to get involved and to do, curricular or co-curricular work in this field. Another thing I can talk about is Bob talked about the voter registration project that we've been running along with Asian Law Alliance, which is a community-based legal aid organization in San Jose. I could talk a little bit more about the service learning project or course project that myself and other members of our department utilized in order to increase voter registration by getting students to register others. So I could talk more about that as well. And I'm in I have a 9-month-old daughter, and so this is her room. She's not really sleeping here yet, but we've decorated. You can see the flowers in the background. And I put my coat rack here because there's nowhere else for it to go. So it's kind of storage right now, but once she stays in here, I'll move that out. But I'm in there right now. It's working pretty good as an office space for now. So thanks.
Great, thank you. So great thoughts about what we can talk about today. As the speakers are talking, if you have questions, please put them in the chat or go to the participants icon down below and raise your hand if you want to ask the speaker a particular question. So now we'll get into some details, and we'll ask each speaker to describe 1 or 2 models for voter education. We know that it helps to hear specifics about how people implement things. So we're going to start with Bob and have each of the folks talk about some specific programs models that they have. Bob?
So Jim, do you mind if I share out the work with PPS as a kind of a current example, public policy school for that?
That's perfectly, that'll work, Bob.
Okay.
And I'll just have to say I'm on the same call with Bob at 1:30, so unfortunately I have to go as well at that time.
So if I could share an ongoing example that Jim mentioned and that I mentioned as well, and that's the work that we're doing with the Asian Law Alliance, community-based org in San Jose. What we've done, so if I could kind of give you the parameters of this, Jim and I created this program. Actually, myself and Cynthia from VITA created this public policy school. And if I could just share a little background on that, because I think it might be useful for our purposes here. Initially, it was a program that was designed to do local advocacy work, kind of in the state of California and in our region, and then also to engage with the federal kind of piece. And so we had folks that came in as kind of, they weren't paid, they were volunteers. We called them, we called them at different times different things, but fellows, public policy school folks, we didn't have a real name for these folks, but they weren't paid folks. We decided what we would do is instead of going to DC as we did every year, we would save that 10 grand and actually create an internship program where we could pay folks to do advocacy work. And this year, part of that advocacy work has been voter registration. And we've done it through our connection with the Asian Law Alliance. And so we've used that money that came from that grant and the money that we had for our public policy school to pay interns to do advocacy work and to do voter reg work. And in particular, what they've done this year, we found this to be really very efficient, if you will, method is when we could, and this is before the pandemic, right? When we could, we went to naturalization ceremonies. And so as folks came out of the naturalization ceremonies, we were there with a table, ready to register folks, right? And so we had our paid interns there staffing this. And then we also had a bunch of volunteers who were supporting them in the effort. And so those folks were quite physically right in the path of folks coming out of a naturalization ceremony. And so, Jim, you can help me with the numbers here. I don't remember the exact numbers, but there was a very, very effective method for registering folks and for also sharing information both about ALA as well as other community orgs and other resources that folks could tap into. I think that's probably the best concrete specific example of some work that we're doing here. I could provide another model or another piece of this if that would be helpful, but maybe I'll just pause there.
Yeah, can I just add in really quick to that? Yeah, Bob gave a good overview of that. I think the volunteers came from our classes that had our service designation on those courses. These are service learning courses. And so many of our service learning courses require, or all of them do actually, 12 hours of community service. And so an instructor could utilize this voter registration project as one of many that they might want to roll out and allow students to opt into to get, for that assignment. And at some point during this call, I can show you what that assignment looks like that we use for voter registration. Actually, I'd be happy to share it if anybody wants it. I'll put my email address in the chat, and if people at the end want to email me, I could share that with them.
Jim, if you can send it to me, I can send it to everyone.
Wonderful.
After the call.
Great, Irving. Thank you.
So I just want to check Bob and Jim because I don't always do good in time calculations. So are you leaving in 2 minutes, or are you leaving
No, I'm sorry, Gail. I think I overemphasize the importance of leaving early. We've got another hour. We don't have to check out until 1:29. I just wanted to, I didn't know how long we had planned, so I just wanted to register
It's
respectful.
It's 12:30 here on the West Coast.
Okay.
Yeah, we've got an hour.
Appreciate it. Great. So, so we can go ahead and let Jacob talk for a little bit about a model or two, and then we can, keep, if you, Bob and Jim, want to share another one, you're welcome to do that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you. One of the first things I wanted to, I guess, mention is a caveat when we're talking about voter education. And I think it's really important for us to think of voter education in two ways. First, and I think is probably the most obvious in terms of college students, is educating those students on the candidates and issues that'll be on the ballot. That's obviously a big piece of voter education. But a second piece, I think, is our need to reconceptualize voter education to really include the entirety of the election process. As we know, in states across the country, voter registration laws, voter ID laws changed somewhat regularly, whether it's because of legislative action or judicial action. And ballot access that considers public health needs has obviously become a very important topic as of late. And I think that in reconceptualizing voter education, we also need to consider the barriers that impact students. And those barriers can obviously vary based on their economic situation, their local administration and state administration of elections, and even really with the most basic elements of representative democracy. One of the things that I've found, so many of our students, our college students, really lack some of those basic civic, some of that basic civic knowledge. Things like, what is the role of a mayor or the city council? What's the difference between a state rep and a U.S. representative? What's a primary versus a general election versus a caucus? And so I think that it's important for us to situate voter education in that way. In terms of models, I mentioned a little bit about SEEP's Engagement Fellows program, and that is a peer-to-peer model. And SEEP is not unique in having a peer-to-peer model. Obviously, for those of you who work with the Andrew Goodman Foundation and the ambassadors, and also Campus Vote Project's Democracy Fellows, these are examples of peers that are trained to reach out to their peers and educate them and also mobilize them. And as Bob talked about with his example of interns, a lot of this comes back to, this is work, this is labor. How are we going to go about actually doing that? And with a peer-to-peer model like our fellows program, it provides professional development, it provides training, and we really emphasize how students, what they learn during the fellowship, how it can translate after their fellowship experience, and even after their college experience. How do those skills that are developed and learned transfer into their first job? Things along those lines. Another example of using the peer-to-peer model, a colleague at the University of Central Missouri who chairs their American Democracy Project, each fall semester they hire 4 to 5 students to conduct class visits. And Dr. Bax has reported that doing this peer approach and class visits, working with faculty members, has really helped to increase their overall voter registration rates among students. And those class visits can also be used for educating students on deadlines and the issues that will be happening on the election, during the election, I should say. And the second model I wanted to mention, and then I'll turn it back over, really a key resource that SEEP has developed for several years now is our nonpartisan candidate guides. And candidate and issue guides are really important in terms of voter education. A lot of students, and I shouldn't even just say students, a lot of folks in general don't necessarily know where to turn to find factual information, nonpartisan information that they can trust. And I'm a big fan of SEEP's nonpartisan candidate guides. Typically, they're created for the presidential election and most Senate and gubernatorial races. Just with how much time goes into them, unfortunately, it's generally not possible to do it for all 435 House of Reps races and local races. But a link that I'll be sharing a little bit later after this, a resource that SEEP developed is a resource on how to create guides. And there are also other organizations like the League of Women Voters that typically create really wonderful guides on issues and candidates. And so I would encourage folks to find those resources, whether they be SEEP's guides, guides.vote, simple link for you. But again, I'll be sharing that, and I'll talk about that just a little bit later when we talk about co-curricular approaches as well.
Great, thank you. And you can go back to Bob and Jim and see if you want to share any other models. I do want to encourage the 3 of you to, if you want to add on to each other, that's totally fine. we did have a question about how many students, look at it again, I think how many students are registered, yeah, in your school, state, or county. And then we are going to talk about barriers in a little bit, so we'll leave for a couple more questions from now. But how many students are there, Bob or Jim, in your county?
Jim, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I think it's pretty low. I don't know when the last time we've actually gone and done a survey on this on our campus, but I mean, just looking at our student elections on our campus, it's probably around 3 to 5% that actually vote, and so I think that the registration is relatively low, but the turnout is obviously worse than that. And with the pandemic, I think it's going to be a difficult challenge. I just had a talk with my political science 1 class about voting in the fall and how it probably will move to mail-in ballots, and it's going to make registration more difficult. We're trying to, with the move to online, the curricular project that we had before to register voters in our classes, that model has to change from a paper process to an online electronic process, for example. And so I walked my students through our Secretary of State's website on how that works and how to complete that. But I think it's going to be more of a challenge. But I think Jacob was mentioning the power of in-class room visits. Our interns were doing that with a lot of success. In terms of getting instructors involved and getting students involved, both to register to vote as well as to vote. That helped our numbers quite a bit. But I had some announcements on my live Zoom meeting the other day, and I know Bob does that too. And I think that that's something that we're going to have to do going forward, and that all depends on whether instructors are going to go live synchronous. A lot of instructors, it appears to me, are going asynchronous in terms of their courses, and I think that that's going to provide an additional barrier to getting more people involved. I mean, just providing a link on your Canvas or something like that is not going to be the same as hearing somebody speak about it, for example. So that's my take. Bob, you want to add on?
Yeah, so was the question how many young people, 18 to 25, are registered in the county? Is that I wasn't quite sure. Was that the gist behind the question? I'm not quite sure.
I thought it was referring to how many students at our college, but yeah, I'm not sure if we have that.
So what we know is that the turnout rates are abysmal. Right? We know that in terms of the actual voting. And we assume then too, without knowing actually the actual numbers, that the registration rates are low. I just want to double down on what Jacob said, if I may, on everything he said when it came to the classroom visits model. That is hugely effective. We have students do classroom presentations to all the folks who do civic engagement in their classes or service learning in their classes. And on our campus, that's anywhere between 15 and 20 faculty. And so that's exposure to well over 1,000 students, 1,500 students that are getting a presentation about voting, the importance of voting. And as Jacob said, I really like the issue guides and process guides, hugely important. Because as you said, people don't necessarily know the mechanics or where to seek out nonpartisan voter information, candidate and issue information. So oftentimes we will produce those as well. Jacob, our VITA will produce those, will produce those. Ours tend to be, with the union, they tend to be much more targeted to particular issues and candidates that we care about, right? As opposed, but we also build in kind of voter interest guides in our work so that we can, incentivize the registration process. And then we also gather information of those folks who have given interest in voting. We gather information about the issues that they care about, and then we engage in ongoing communication with those folks through texting, reminders about when the vote's coming up, and so forth. And so if I could give you so we have classroom presentations, we have the issue candidate guides. We have groups on our campus, for example, our AB 540 students, HEFAS organization, has done a series of presentations on folks who are undocumented and or international students that can participate in voter registration and voter education efforts, even if they themselves can't do so. We have almost 2,000 international students in our campus, so it's a huge body. We have a very, very large number of undocumented as well. And so that inclusion of those folks is key, because there's oftentimes that kind of the assumption that those folks can't participate in the voter education or voter registration piece, but they certainly can. You know, so they can say, look, you know, there's a role for us to play in this to encourage others to get involved. I wanted to mention another thing, though, if I could, before turning to another example, a project example, if I could, where we used interns around voter registration. And that is something that Cynthia Kaufman shared with me this morning. And I wish she was here with us today. I think it would be worthwhile to invite her for future exchanges, because she's got a wealth of knowledge about kind of the practical and historical context for this. But she indicated to us that work-study monies under federal laws, federal mandates, require that 7% of that work-study money is geared towards civic engagement work. You know, I didn't know that. And we ourselves on our campus aren't compliant with that, because we have a bunch of work-study folks who aren't doing civic engagement, even though we have a large number of folks doing civic engagement work. So that, to me, that's like an untapped, at least in our case, an untapped resource that could be brought to bear on this. I wanted to mention, and forgive me for talking too much here, but I wanted to mention the Fair Elections Legal Network. Jacob, I'm sure you're quite familiar with their work. They're a hugely important resource for voting barriers, voting processes. They have guidelines for every single state in the country, current issues that are, involved there. And so it's the Fair Elections Legal Network, or FELN. And you can find, just through a quick search, their resources online by state, as well as the national effort. We found them to be hugely helpful as a resource. If I could just, one last project. Of course, we had our March this year. California had a March primary. So we typically were in June, so we had it before the pandemic. It seems like it was 10 years ago, but it was just 2 months ago. And we were very successful in getting a bond passed, $890 million bond for our district, which is historic in size, magnitude. Our interns through our union were crucial in doing classroom presentations, recruiting folks to do phone banking for that campaign, for that successful bond campaign, through classroom presentations, and through voter education, voter mobilization work in those classes, because we coupled all of those together in the presentations themselves. We were able to recruit 185 student volunteers to staff the phone banks right up to election night. And it was a hugely important piece. We also then did voter interest cards that folks filled out. We followed up with those folks, and we incentivized this by saying, we didn't say you have to vote X, Y, or Z. We didn't direct people as to how they should vote. It was all nonpartisan. It was all educational. But we had folks say, are you committed to voting? And if so, you fill out this form. And there was a voter interest form. Yes, I'm committed to voting. Voting matters was the form. And we were able then to use that information to contact those folks and to send them friendly reminders about, when the deadlines are and when they should be voting and so forth. And we then randomly chose 3 people who were winners of a $100 gift card. So $300. We had this large pool of folks that we were in communication with that were able to mobilize and actually turn out to vote. So I know for some folks that might think that's weird, that's kind of directing folks, that seems very political, but it doesn't have to be. I mean, it can be framed, as voter interest, and you can incentivize participation through that process, because you're not telling people how to vote. Ultimately, you're telling people to vote, and you're not even ensuring that they do in fact vote, but it's couched within a kind of a larger civic engagement project where you're trying to get folks to turn out. I'm gonna stop it there.
Well, thank you so much for all those great ideas. We've got some things going on in the chat that I want to bring to the attention of all three speakers. One, Jacob shared the link for Old Dominion's NSOLVE report. If you're not connected to NSOLVE, it's a initiative out of Tufts where your university or college can register and they can track your student voting or your student registration and your student voting rates. And so that's a great resource to be involved with that. And so Jacob, when you come back on, you can maybe say a couple words about that. But there were several questions about tracking, how many students are registered and how many vote. So do any of you have another way of tracking how many?
Can I add something here?
Yes.
The main point of my chat earlier was, the students, it sounds like students are the rate of registration for students is super low anyway. So I don't know how beneficial it would be to sort of look at, the students that might not come back to campus when they're registered in their university town to vote. If they're still at home, there's like that missing connection. Well, don't they need to re-register?
So that's a great question that I do not know the answer to. Does anybody here know that? So a student who goes to school in Kansas, but they live in Massachusetts, they've gone back home to Massachusetts and they're just doing class online, do they have to re-register?
Gail, I can answer that. This is Tammy Bean from Cedar Crest, and I've been on a number of different calls over the last couple of weeks. And one of the challenges is if they are living in Kansas, but they're going to school in another state or another place, their registration if they get like a mail-in voter application, they can't have that actually sent through postal mail. So they would have to re-register wherever they are located at that time of when the election will be. So that, I agree with Jamie, that's going to be a huge challenge for us in any state, no matter where you are, because we can't mail, you can't mail voter ballots out. They're not allowed to be forwarded by postal law. So that's going to be quite an interesting piece to see how that's going to work out, especially in states like Pennsylvania. We just instituted the ability to vote by mail back in October, and so it just started for this election cycle. And because we haven't done it before, there will be mistakes made, and then that will create some huge challenges for people who wanted to vote in the county where they were originally registered. So there's going to have to be a huge amount of education on that.
And if I can just chime in quickly, of course, each state is different, but for example, in Ohio, I mean, this work will need to be done as early as possible, because in Ohio, you have to be a resident for 30 days before you can legally register to vote. So.
We all have our work cut out for us.
Yeah, politicians do. Jeez.
That's right. Another theme that was talking about was how to get faculty engaged in this voter education. And I think there were a couple of people on here who had some ideas. Was that you, Jacob, or somebody else?
Yeah. One of our fellows at the University of Missouri Columbia at Mizzou this past year created a PowerPoint called 10 Minutes for Democracy. So it was really just a voter registration 101, 10 slides that could be shared with faculty, and it could be edited. They could cut stuff out, add stuff in, but it included information with just the laws and rules around voter registration, how to get an absentee ballot, things along those lines. And so our goal, I should say, with this particular resource, my goal with our campuses that we work with in Virginia and Missouri, and I know my colleagues who work with other states, is to have this template be available and have state-specific versions of it. And so I'm planning, I sent a couple messages to some of, or got messages from a couple of the Virginia folks, and not just Virginia, other schools too. And so I'm going to email out that template that we have. It's, again, very simple, but the idea being that a faculty member could put it in at the beginning or the end of their lecture, or use that as part of the discussion in PowerPoint. As many of you know, in the bottom, you can type in information, have notes for yourself during the presentation. So it includes some general notes about that as well, to help give faculty some talking points.
That sounds like a great idea. Does anybody else have any ideas of encouraging faculty, especially ones that might be a little resistant?
I'll just chime in really quickly about the challenges of it, especially outside of political science and social science and humanities. We've had good luck in the past being able to convince like English faculty and social science humanities faculty to, add, say, a civic learning requirement to their, or service learning requirement to their course. But it's been a little bit more difficult. I think the pitch can be made to the sciences and math to do this as well. But I'll let Bob kind of speak to that. You were director, Bob, for a little while, and can speak more to how we were able to convert maybe some of those biochemistry, engineering instructors to doing some more civic engagement work.
Yeah, so as Jim said, it has been challenging for our Civic Engagement Institute to kind of expand throughout the entire campus. So Jim and I are at a 2-year school at a community college. And we do have folks that are represented in, say, biology, and we are making some inroads into accounting. It really comes down to, I think, the training that we did initially when we introduced service learning to the campus. It was really an effort to try to draw the connections for individuals between this work and their subject matter. And then I think the other thing that we've done or tried to emphasize is we've built it into our institutional kind of core competencies as well as our mission and values for the college. And so it's a nice way to kind of to emphasize, re-emphasize, integrate, kind of provide rationale where individuals who might be concerned about their programs but don't necessarily see the connection between their program and this civic engagement work, to show them that this is in fact the institution's work, and you as part of this institution have a kind of an obligation to ensure that the mission is advanced in your work. And frankly, to the extent to which you do so, you're actually improving the status of your program and its likelihood of being continued. You know what I mean? I don't mean to say that we try to scare folks, but to the extent to which you can show people that not only is it appropriate, and Jim, you'll be sharing out what it is that faculty can and can't do, that document to kind of, because there are a lot of folks who are, say, even in the social sciences, feel like they can't be political. They can't talk about candidates. They can't talk about issues because they have this kind of notion of, frankly, what I think is false objectivity, that as if you could have such a position, rather than just saying, look, we're going to talk about these issues. I think a lot of folks have been helped by that statement, Jim, that we posted on the Academic Senate website, to say, look, we're political. We have an obligation as part of our mission to educate people about these processes and these institutions as well as these issues. And so let's do so. At the same time, we know we need to be balanced. We can't deny access to opposing positions if they've asked us to come in to do classroom presentations, what have you. We need to be an open forum, right? But I think that has been really helpful in kind of easing some of the concerns that folks have. So I think there's institutional kind of pushes and pulls that you can present to folks. I still think it's going to be hard, to make really deep inroads into certain fields. It's just, folks just, are going to kind of see the politics of their profession or they're not, and of their discipline or not, in ways in which they connect it, right? I mean, there's obviously kind of natural connections between any kind of accounting and politics, or any kind of chemistry and politics, or really, I mean, if you imagine just a little bit, there's all kinds of connections that can be drawn, especially given the crisis we face all over the place, not just the pandemic, but just the environmental crisis we face. That's going to touch every discipline, whether you know it or not, especially those in the kind of the physical sciences. So that's, yeah.
I just pasted in that document into the chat for folks if they want to take a look at, but just a couple points on that. Can't use public resources, you know, on partisan politics. You could talk about partisanship. The idea is to give equal time. If you invite someone that's maybe a Democrat, then also invite the Republican, you know, that's running in a race to come to your class, for example, just so that you at least provide the opportunity for that. So just a couple things. Feel free to take a look at that and to use it if you find it helpful.
And Tammy has also posted something which sounds like a great idea too, about having faculty and departments talk about the impacts of public policy in that particular field. So environmental biology or chemistry or whatever, how public policy affects that. And then that could get the interest of the faculty and the students. We have only 4 minutes left until 4 o'clock, which is when this is over. But I think if folks want to stay a few minutes after, I think maybe the speakers are available for a few more minutes if you want to do some more exchanges. So I'm wondering if each of you might just do, you know, a minute and a half, either something about, you know, what barriers you think are going to be important to overcome. Some of it you already talked about with the, you know, uncertainty of how school is going to start back up in the fall, or maybe some collaborations between curricular and co-curricular. So just take a minute or a minute and a half or so and just give us one more idea to take with us. And then folks, if you want to stay on for a little bit, we can continue talking for a few minutes. Let's see, Jacob, do you want to start first?
Sure thing.
Yeah.
I guess a couple quick points I want to make. In terms of one of the questions we were posed today for this was, where and how do you find partners who help develop and promote voter education? And I think the first thing I want to encourage folks to do is really think beyond the usual suspects, like the political science department or the college Republicans and Democrats or Libertarians. Rich mentioned actually that he works with the Bicycle Club. And as you're creating coalitions on your campus, don't assume that just because that student organization or that major or academic department doesn't 100% align with you know, our vision of voter engagement, that there isn't value in those relationships. I'm thinking of an example at Washington University in St. Louis, where their Sam Fox School of Design and Visual Arts, it's a class called Design for Social Impact. In 2018, their students created posters that were pro-social, pro-voting posters. And they took those and they projected those on the wall in the gymnasium. And that gym also served as the polling place. So it was a great way to include students who have a background in art and design. And then finally, in terms of barriers that we should be thinking of and preparing for, I mentioned this a little bit, but it's I think so important to mention again that voter engagement, voter education, it's work, it's labor. And for most tasks across the university, we identify who on that campus is responsible for carrying them out. When it comes to voter engagement, so many of our campuses don't have a designated person, whether faculty or staff, to coordinate those efforts. From what I've seen, so many campuses, it is folks that are passionate about it, but voter engagement is not in their official job description. A lot of the times it's added to their plate. And so that's extra work. And oftentimes that extra work is done by minoritized groups, so women, people of color, LGBTQ folks as well. And I think it's just really important to keep that in mind. And as we move forward, thinking about how campuses can institutionalize a position like a student vote coordinator, which is a title of a position proposed under HR 1 that was passed by the House in 2019. And as I mentioned earlier as well, faculty have an opportunity to play a huge role in engaging their students. And I don't have time to get into a survey of faculty that SEEP conducted this past semester. We'll be releasing the results of that in the coming months, and I'll definitely share it with this group. But we found that faculty, so many of them are interested in having dialogues in their class and talking to their students, but so many have reported that they don't feel like they're equipped. They don't feel like they're trained. They're concerned about what happens if things get unruly. And I think there's a lot that we can do to support faculty, train faculty on how to create a space in their classroom for civic learning and democratic engagement. So yeah, with that, I'll turn it over to the other wonderful panelists.
Thanks so much, Jacob. And I know that it's 4 o'clock, so if you do need to hop off, feel free to do that. We will send you some follow-up information. But if you can stay on, we'll let Jim and Bob have a final thought on this work. Jim, do you want to go?
Thanks. Thanks all for joining today. Thanks for having us. A couple thoughts. One word that comes to mind in terms of barriers and how we could overcome them is the fact that I think we need to just be more virtual with everything that we do. We need to think more virtually and use social media and the technology available to us. Whether it's Zoom meetings, Zoom class meetings with your students live, I think that's preferable. Students are really looking for engagement. They're looking to talk to other students right now. A lot of students are feeling lonely and need that connection. Why don't we do more we're doing a student town hall, our public policy school is putting on a student town hall, and that's to check in with students, provide resources, get them to register to vote. We're gonna try to do probably several things with it. And so we can utilize those opportunities, and because I think students do want to engage. I'm getting to know my students better now during this pandemic than I did face-to-face for some reason. I think students are just kind of into it. I've got 25 students in my office hours, never seen that outside my door. They want to connect, they want to talk about what's going on, they want to commiserate about courses going to online. And I think that's an opportunity to engage those students. And faculty too. I think that it all depends on whether or not we're willing to use some of these, technological tools. Hustle, for example, to get out the vote, to remind people via text to do that. I think that's a wonderful platform. And so, yeah, we're just going to have to do more of that and give more people opportunities to connect. And I think that that's how we can get people to register online, and then get them to elect mail-in ballot or take the mail-in ballot and send that back in come November, if all goes according to that plan.
Thank you. Bob?
Yes, so one of the things that we're doing just to kind of address the uncertainties is we're going to get started early. We've got this national election in November. We're going to get started on our work, not in the fall, not in September when we start off, but actually we're going to back it up. We're trying to get the work started next month, bringing in new interns and to strategize about a fall campaign and how we're going to lay that out. Our goal is to identify and to engage about 3,000 students as new registrants on the campus, and to identify the kind of issues that they care about and to be in communication with those folks through Hustle and other forms. I want to just double on what Jacob said. You really need to pay folks for this work. I mean, so you got to find the money. We found it through our union, our political action committee, because our union's paying for this. People support. They do extra donations to the PAC committee, and we use that PAC money to pay student interns in this faculty-student collaboration, because that's what it is. We're collaborating. The other resource we've tapped into is student money. Our students have a student representation fee that they pay into this fund that they pay into. They've given us, over the last 2 years, $5,000, and they've earmarked another $5,000 for us next year. Our other college, we are 2 colleges in our district, $10,000 for the internship program. So that's students and faculty putting their money together to do this work, this political work of voter identification, voter registration, and voter mobilization, all of it. And then also, of course, the education piece. So I think resources are key. It's about marshaling those, and then, strategy and techniques, as Jim said. It's going to be virtual, it's going to be mail-in, it's going to be different. So it's about trying to figure out, well, what's going to work in this new environment, because we just have no idea what it's going to look like. We really don't. So thank you very much for having us here today. I'm happy to hang out too. I've got until 1:20, 1:25, something like that, for a short break.
Great. Thank you all so much. I'm really grateful, Jacob, Jim, and Bob, for your time today. I'm wondering if there is anybody that's sticking with us that has a question or has an idea that you'd like to share. Oh, Bob has another idea.
Can I ask Tammy if she wouldn't mind explaining her post or on the chat stream regarding the 7% for off-campus community engagement?
Sure. The federal requirement. So I've worked with financial aid at a couple different institutions. I've been the off-campus community work study representative for Cedar Crest College off and on over the years. And so the federal requirement is 7% for off-campus community work study. So it's not just civic engagement. It's working with community agencies and community organizations, and having your work study students working within that community. A piece of that is also that if colleges and universities receive federal funds, they are also required to have some form of a tutoring program, whether that's tutoring children or tutoring adults that have children. That is also a piece of that, and that qualifies too for the part of that 7% requirement. And each campus, how campuses define what that 7% is different, because the federal government doesn't give you some really solid guidelines. They give you some vague pieces. So there are campuses that I know that say, oh, well, our library could be used by somebody from the community, so anybody in the library could be counted as part of that 7%. So it really depends on how the institutions read those regulations and actually define them.
If I may, Tammy, the reason Cynthia shared that with us this morning was actually to kind of pursue it a bit, I think, because she's hoping that she can use that requirement as some leverage at our campus, because most of our work study students are not involved in the civic engagement work. And so she, I think, had interpreted it as civic engagement specific, in the hopes that by communicating that to the folks who oversee our work study, that there would be more resource brought to bear on civic engagement work. But it sounds like what you're saying is that's not necessarily the case, that one could interpret those regs to mean tutoring or something else totally off campus that wasn't necessarily civic engagement work.
Correct. And I think it also depends on how it's defined. Because there are some individuals who say, well, if you are working with a community organization off campus, you're civically engaged. But in the definition that you're using, that isn't the same. Those definitions look a little different. So again, part of it is how are those things defined within your institutions?
Yeah, and I know many of our work study students don't engage in any community work off campus. So unless you were to stretch that definition to include our own community as a community, then
and that's where it's really important to have conversations with the financial aid office. And part of the reason why I know a lot of this, one, because I've worked with financial aid. I've actually worked within a financial aid office at one point in time, but also because my office does the off-campus community work study work. And so when we define it as a campus, they're looking at me and going, well, this is your area. If we're not making that percentage, then what are we doing to ensure that we get that amount of students out? And so So that's part of the reason why I have some background on that. But again, that piece of being cautious, because it is federal money, it has to be nonpartisan.
Right.
So that's the other challenge with the money, is because once you do something one party or the other and becomes a partisan piece, then you lose those funds. And that can really hinder the institution's work, what they do, who they work with, why they work with them.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, the executive director of the National Campus Compact has been kind of watching this work study issue a little bit, because it is under some people are suggesting that it goes away in the education reappropriation bill or reauthorization bill. But Jacob has put in a resource. I don't know if you want to say anything about that in the chat box. Do you want to say anything about that?
And so it's a complicated issue, and it's one that we've had several staff members working with campus partners on over the years. And one thing I do know about this is that you couldn't create a new position that is just for voter engagement. It has to be a position that is civic engagement, and voter engagement can be a piece of it. And so this particular resource lays out a little information and gives an example of Westchester University and how their service learning and volunteer programs was able to use or access those work study dollars. So yeah, just and there are a few other examples on there as well. Obviously, that there are complexities, but I think it's really important to have those conversations, like was said, and really again challenge what our notion of civic engagement is, and expand upon that. But it's a little challenging too. I think of AmeriCorps, for example. AmeriCorps members are not allowed to do voter engagement or voter registration, and so there are so many. I shouldn't even say mixed messages, but messages that are sent and that are received by folks on campus. And I think a lot of individuals I talk to, they're concerned. It's working with several offices on campus, and then two, is this even something that they'll go for? So we end up becoming, I say we, folks on our campuses, become educators for our colleagues, and having to understand details of federal policy that maybe is not the most digestible for us even, let alone people who this is far outside of the realm of what their job is.
Wonderful. Thank you. I don't see any other questions coming up. Do any of you have any?
Not a question, but I will agree with Jacob on reading those federal regs when it comes to financial aid and what that means and what that looks like, and the work study piece. Because I've been working in this field for so long, I know where the off-campus community work study stuff is in the federal regulations. And I talk very, very closely with our director of financial aid. So she and I have a relationship that when somebody will challenge me on something, I will go, well, you need to go to this regulation on this page in this chapter. And they're like, what? And then they'll call her and she'll go, oh yeah, Tammy's right. But part of it is because I've done it for so long that I recognize where it is. But to find it and to see it and to know it is a challenge. Mm-hmm. And it, Gail mentioned the Reauthorization Act for higher ed. That's been in the works for years and hasn't happened. And the idea that off-campus community work study may go away has been talked about for years. And when there was one senator who was like, no, we don't need to make it go away. We need to increase it from 7% to 15%. And so it's gone both ways. And so that you're not hearing everything that's going to happen, and it's not happening. Like, it's not moving forward. And I think that's a challenge too, related to how all that stuff works. but Jacob's right. The regulations are, whew,
Well,
it's a bit much.
I was talking about this with my partner, I think just last night, that the last time the HEA was reauthorized was 2008, and it's supposed to be every 5 years. And so we've been in this limbo, this policy limbo with, continuing funding resolutions and things for, what is that, 7 years now. And I think that if that's not a harbinger of the state of our democracy and polity, I don't know what is.
We have a lot of work to do. That's for sure. Well, it's 4:15. I really want to thank everybody for staying longer. Bob, Jim, Jacob, thank you so much. You've shared a lot of great information. We had a lot of positive comments as people were leaving the webinar. We'll get some information out to everybody, and we might include a couple things that are happening in Campus Compact too, so you can join. National Campus Compact is starting to think about doing more hybrid things, more online conferences and online workshops and things like that people can participate in. So we really want everybody to take advantage of that too. So if you have your little reaction button, and give our speakers a round of applause. You can't
Nice.
hear us.
Thank you all. Thank you, Gail and Tammy and Brenna and Irving, Jacob, Jim. Yeah.
Thank you
We
all.
greatly appreciate any info that you could share too about Campus Compact and the national meetings. We really miss kind of our TDC, the kind of the former iteration.
Yes, we'll be glad to send you that information, and get the word out a little bit more so that you can.
Yeah, and I definitely encourage you to sign up for your state Campus Compact email newsletter, as well as SEEP's newsletter. We're on Facebook. We're pretty much everywhere. So Facebook, just look for Ohio Campus Compact if you're interested in seeing what we have to offer. Some of our things, of course, are state specific, but not all. But yeah, our offerings and information are on Facebook as well. So
thank you, Brenna.
Thank you.
And I just want to say that the national gathering, which was online last week, it's on the Campus Compact YouTube channel. And it was the theme was centering democracy. So that great webinars. But I also want to mention that we have one more virtual resources change. That's going to be on June 3rd, so in a few weeks at 3 o'clock. It's going to be on supporting and recognizing student voter registration and education.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Irving.
Thanks, everyone.
Irving.
Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, Gail. Thank you all. Tammy as well.
Yes, thank you so much. We'll be in touch.
Okay.
Bye.
Take care, everyone.
Be well.
Thanks.